You have the textbook, which I have right here, Government and Business by Richard Laney, and I think it's a very good book. I have not required that you read the whole thing because I have other things I want you to do in this class. I have asked this week that you look at chapter 1, which is a nice overview, the historical overview of the relationship of business and government. And I think that it gives you a pretty good perspective, and I'd like to integrate some of what you learn in those chapters in your answer. I would ask you to look at he's got a chart at the end of the chapter, which I found somewhat interesting because it explains where we have been and where we're going. Table 1-2 on page 22, there's a chart that just talks about the various phases of business and government and the law. It's a little chart at the other page. You probably can't see it there, but take a look at it with your own textbook. And what's noteworthy to me is that he divides our history into 3 areas, the colonial times to the Civil War to the Great Depression, and the Great Depression till now. And he talks about 3 types of relationships. One is a legal relationship, one is the business organization relationship, and one which really focuses on the role of government. And what he says is, as we've gone through history, there are certain times in which the legal piece dominated, the business piece dominated, and the role of government dominated or changed things. And the chart is self-explanatory. Where he ends up right now is by saying that that Great Depression to 2010, the role of government was defined by a growth in government and dealing with issues like sustaining government programs. I'd suggest there is a new dimension, and that's why I'm excited about this class. The new dimension is not looking at those things as separate entities, but looking at the next dimension being the integration of government and business, particularly on addressing and solving most problems. I don't think problems can be solved by any sector alone. Part of the reason for that is that we don't understand enough about our government or business as a populace, as American citizens, to make informed decisions. And one of the things I hope to do in this class is to help you awaken an understanding to the dimensions that aren't necessarily always in the newspaper, but they sort of explain things that you should know and understand if you're going to be, as citizens, have some say in the way your lives evolve, your children's lives evolve, and have some stake in the future. We either are going to be a society that lets events dictate our lives, or as informed citizens, we have some, not complete, because the world is complex, but some ability to choose and direct and decide what's good for ourselves. I used to teach a class in public policy, and a second class, a companion class, that was called Implementing Public Policy. And the first class is where most of us are. There's a good idea, let's find a way to pass a law. Let's say hooray for welfare reform, for health care, for an immigration bill, and we have people lined up on all sides, and we go lobby, and we have elections, and the bill gets passed. That was the first course. The second course starts with, now the bill has been passed, what do we do? And that's where a tremendous number of forces take effect right away that in many cases unravel all of the elements of the bill that were passed. We have a health care reform bill that was passed 2010, and it's still in some sort of definitional stage as we try and figure out, as we roll it out, what it means, what it says, what the implication is. It's very hard to be for or against something 2 years ago when you really have no way of knowing what it's going to look like when it comes. And the extent to which we understand that as students in public administration or business administration or anything else we're studying is going to give us a more sophisticated understanding. That part of education, which is what you have left after you've forgotten everything you've learned, that's what I want to be able to do here. I've asked that we engage in projects, substantive projects, and I'm going to be putting you into groups on week 3, which are going to be focused around those topics. And I've listed them in the syllabus. You can look at them again. And I'm going to ask you to decide which one you want to work on, from healthcare reform to immigration policy to a reform of financial institutions to cybersecurity and the like. And I think that it's going to be important in this class that we just not learn theory of business administration, but that we look at those topics and ourselves begin to understand how business, government, and nonprofit can work together and will be required to work together, and what the obstacles they face are to make all that happen. Critical piece of understanding the obstacles that they face is just understanding how these things work. So in the first couple of weeks, I'm going to be talking to you and showing you things which make you take a deeper look, even before we've established the basics, even before we go through the Constitution, which we're not going to do, but I'll make it available to you. I'd like you to be aware that things are not always what they seem, or things are not explained as well as they are in textbooks. Take, for example, the way we elect our presidents. Whether you're a political scientist or not, you're aware, I'm sure, that every 4 years there's a process in which a whole bunch of people that are Republicans and a whole bunch of people that are Democrats run for president, and they spend about 2 years going to fairs, attending caucuses, kissing babies, giving speeches, going on TV, debating one another for an extended time that usually bores the gajabbers out of everybody, and sort of leaves as the last person standing someone that you may or may not have selected at the beginning of the process. But it's an incredibly complicated process, and the process by itself does determine the character of our country. It determines only a certain kind of person survives that process. In the old days, we didn't have a primary process. We had a convention process where the elected leaders would go to a city like Chicago, New York, or Philadelphia, and they'd be there for a week. And at the end of that process, the elected leaders would choose that elected leader among them they thought was ready to be president. That's how we nominated people like Theodore Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson, Franklin Roosevelt, Dwight Eisenhower, John Kennedy. The politicians and the elected officials, after talking and debating and fighting, selected the person they thought most capable of winning. It was elected officials selecting elected officials. That seemed to discipline the system for many years. It broke during the 1960s in a wave of reforms. I won't get into that here. But the result was this primary process where we want not elected officials choosing, but we want the people choosing, and we want it to be chosen with all these elections and caucuses. It's changed everything. It's changed the way we select our president. It's changed the money we spend. It's changed the kind of person who runs. It's changed the kind of person who wins. And that change causes a different kind of policy and a different kind of future. It's not a secret that the old system usually nominated someone who was somewhat moderate and was favoring of the institutional approach to things and favored stability. The new system has almost always in both parties selected somebody who was outside the mainstream, a little bit different. President Obama certainly wasn't expected to win, nor was George Bush the first time, nor was Bill Clinton. Things happened during the primary process that catapulted them to the top, and as a result, a different kind of person is there, perhaps a little less experienced, but we certainly have a policy that's different than if someone else had been there. So the question I want to ask yourself, because you're all going to be taking your place in this world, and it gives you an idea of the kinds of things that I think are important to understand things like government-business relations, is how did that process come about? We're a democracy. We're talking about the process that is responsible for selecting our leader, who's going to determine, has an awful lot to do with determining our fate, and certainly the fate of the Western world. And we have processes of government that have to do with elections, laws being passed, Supreme Court decisions, state laws. We know that when we pass a law, we can't do health care without passing a law. What was the process by which we changed from nominating a person based on this sort of consensus acclamation to this labyrinth of primaries, costly primaries? I don't think anybody thinks they're very effective. They certainly look like sausage being made, and they're people in Europe, overseas countries, have no idea why we do that. They're all democracies too, and they don't do anything like this. How did it happen? Who made the decision? What was the basis? What was the authority? Was it Congress? Was it the Supreme Court? Was it the president? Was it governors? Was it state governors? I'm not going to answer that question for you. I'd like you to think about it. And I'm going to hold it open for a while, and throughout the semester, ask somebody to tell me what was the authority and how did it happen that our entire way of electing a president changed dramatically in very consequential ways. You're not really going to understand government and business till you understand how these things happen and what were the influences. I'm also going to ask you to look at how nonprofits that are supposed to be put in place, because dollars and policy is not supposed to be a function of crass business or unthinking policy, but rather a more reasoned approach to deal with issues without having a stake in the outcome. A nonprofit is supposed to be the neutral arbitrator. It doesn't have its own interests. Its only interests are achieving. And yet, there are all kinds of nonprofits that make significant decisions based on the dollars they're able to generate or the impact of the dollars on other entities. The universities by themselves make a tremendous amount of decisions that affect students based on the availability of dollars or the need to put more students in the class. The decision whether classes are going to be 15, 20, 25 certainly affects the quality of education. And yet that decision is not necessarily made from the basis of a nonprofit for the best possible education, but it has to integrate a lot of relatively crass decisions that are made by government and or business relative to finances. And finally, the video I asked you to look at today is a much more interesting and controversial look at how some business policies business practices are made that affect policies that affect us all. I mean, it's no surprise that when the airlines decide that they're going to raise their prices, cut their prices, charge double, charge for bags, squeeze you into seats, it affects a tremendous number of people. And there's almost no public involvement or outcry or debate. Gas prices, oil prices, business makes them, and you would think that given the business sector, they would make them because it's in their rational economic interest to do so. A product costs so much, it costs so much to do business, they pass that cost on to the consumer, and that's what they charge. The video that was produced by Lowell Bergman at Frontline takes a different look at how business drives some policy making that affects the whole country in ways that probably should affect government or have been involved with government. It was an award-winning film in 2009, and I think you'll find it very interesting. Not going to say too much about it now. I want you to look at it, but it will begin, like the issue with the presidential primaries, to cause you to ask yourself the question, how do things really get done? And if I really want to understand the relationship between government and business, what are the kinds of things I need to know? None of us are going to fix those problems. But to engage in the debate about the future of our country, we need to understand them. And to understand the issues that are pending in the areas of business and government relations, I think a starting place might be to just expand your world, your understanding of highly impactful decisions and the process by which they come to pass. I hope you find this stuff interesting. I certainly do. And I'll be around during the week to talk about it. So I'm going to cut this right now. It's probably going to be 2 parts. I think I yacked too long again. And so it'll probably be a 2-part video. So there'll be 3-part videos to watch this week. Enjoy it. If you get too tired, watch the playoff games halfway through and check me out in the morning. But I will, I'll be looking forward to your comments in the posts. Have a good week.